maybe I'll start by asking just about the kind of some of the basic parameters of the performance. I think because it's a cut down, spliced together version of the live performance, perhaps you can walk us through a little bit of the mechanics of the performance, some of the tech that you are using. It seems very expansive and very large. I'm especially interested in like one of those early, like the early Mac that you see in there. So I was wondering, can you just walk us through the basics of what are we hearing in addition to what we're seeing?
Oh, you're looking at me. Okay. When I watched that again, it was really fascinating. Just watching all of the layers and thinking back about actually years that we did filming with Ed. He was filming me when I was pregnant, so that was 1984, and the baby that you see in the film is our son. So you've got me in various stages of pregnancy, and then the child that's produced. And I was also thinking, as we watched Nanique, the really brilliant Javanese dancer. In one segment in the film, you see a kind of oval shape with, activity, visual activity going inside. Nanique was actually on the floor performing on a disc, and the camera was mounted above. So you could see her turning around. It seemed as if the screen was the screen was behind in the performance. But in the live performance, she was literally on the floor, on the disc, being filmed and then being projected. So it looked as if almost she's inside a womb and being able to move freely inside there. As far as the music is concerned, most of it is actually notated. That long segment, the I Want segment, is all improvised vocally. The mallet part was all scored out. But in live performance, the musicians were all on stage, so you had a big projection screen, and just a lot of, as I said, layers and layers and layers of material that were going on.
Oh, just to follow up, I mean, in the intro, Ed said that when the video was made, Ed said you had been working on it for 3 years, and then there were performances in Linz and in LA, and then this video. So I guess I'm curious, you talked a bit about the beginning processes of filming in '84, but how did the piece change or evolve over that long period?
Ed, all three of us actually were at Cal Arts at that time, but Ed had become dean of the film school, I think in 1980, 79, 80, something like that. And he and I, we knew each other, but just in the art world. When he came to Cal Arts, we got to be close and decided to start working on something. It must have been around 1980, 81. And at first, it was just an idea of doing something together, and we began this process for, I think it was almost a year, where we had nothing in mind at all. We just came in, at first, I think it was once a week in a studio, and I'd bring my week's work in, and we'd listen, and he would bring his week's work in, and we'd watch, and then we'd put things together. And Joan and I eventually moved out it must have been, I can't get the years straight, but we moved out to Santa Fe.
In '84, after Jacob was born.
Yeah, so by then we already had the thing. So the period leading up to that, which was probably about a year, we were going through this, and gradually it started to make sense. Some of the things we began to get an idea. We had been invited to do something at the LA Festival and at Linz, and we didn't know what that would be, so we kept working on it, and gradually we came up with an idea that began to come, which was the hungers idea, and so we began to put everything together and start bringing things in that we thought. Again, we didn't know where they were or what they were doing. We could go on forever. It could take a year of me telling you, but it was an incredible process because it wasn't even a collaboration. It was just two people, one seeing and one hearing, and putting the stuff together. And eventually, a whole structure started to evolve, and the idea of the different hungers, and then it became clear what we were doing. And the only thing I'd like to add to that was the whole beginning process. And the only thing that was interesting that I think at one point we were very close to starting to put everything together, the musicians, the part for Joan, the dancing, and all the sections. And in the middle of all that, I walked in with some music, and he walked in with some videos, because we were still doing that even after we moved to Santa Fe, and I would come into Los Angeles and spend. Then we didn't do it once a week; we did it like 2 or 3 days at one time. And he would come to Santa Fe, and one day, I don't remember which city it was, but one day we brought our two things together, and it was so spectacular, but it didn't fit anything. And so we had to put it off to the side for the next work. Ed didn't live long enough for us to be able to do that, but I've told that to students and to people, because you can't throw the kitchen sink in. You know, it wasn't about that, and I don't even remember what it looked and sounded like now, but it was really an amazing process of working. It was one of the closest collaborations I've ever done.
I was curious about when Ed said that you shared information, that is like performance information, and I'm guessing that means MIDI information, maybe, or maybe video information. The computer systems shared information, such that in the live performance there was some kind of relationship between, what we're hearing and what we're seeing.
There was a major interaction. Everything you heard was done live. Not everything. There were some things that were not, but most everything was being done live. You couldn't see that here because that whole I Want section, Joan, you see pictures of her, the silhouette, but she's actually standing there the whole time singing, and you can see her singing, and the hand, the movement between the eye and the mouth are actually in Nanique's hand. She's dancing, and you can see her movement, and it's crossfading. It's causing the video to crossfade between the two images. So absolutely everything is live. I mean, 90% of everything is live.
Yeah, I was struck by that.
It was the beginning of MIDI. It was just the very beginning, and I was using Mac Plus, I guess, 412K, and a program that I designed, programmed by one of my students, but that I designed. And Ed, as he said in there, was working with the Amiga, and the Amiga had MIDI. It was an amazing little computer. It didn't last because there wasn't enough software made for it, so they couldn't sell it. So it died. The Atari took over that space. But so we had the two computers, and we were using early MIDI, and well, I won't give you the whole details, but there were, I think, 6 people in the pit, and there were 4 people on the stage. No, 5, I guess. The 3 and then Nanique and you, so there are 5 on the stage, and 6 in the pit. And Yamaha had given us their first computerized mixer, 6-channel mixer, It was actually designed to go with, as a result of my ghost pieces, so they gave me the first one. And I could not keep, there were 6 people plus me in the pit, but I didn't have anything to do. I was just watching and telling people what to do. And I couldn't keep my hands off of the mixer. I wanted to change it. And of course, the pots were all moving automatically when someone would hit something or they would move. And so they asked Yama to give us another one, and the guys put together this whole thing so I'd have a mixer I could just move. But it was a dummy. To anything.
The mixer they gave him to move and manipulate didn't work. That was their way of sort of controlling the situation.
Yeah, I guess that brings up a question of, like, some of the sequencing seems so fast, like some of the more pulsing sections, some of those sequenced runs seem so fast that it would be difficult for a human to maybe play them. I mean, I'm sure you had very spectacular musicians.
No, they were playing them.
But I guess at least in the video presentation of this work, there seemed to be a kind of a disconnect or a kind of a question of what kind of agent is making the performance happen, because you can't really see, at least in the video.
Yeah,
we saw, right?
It's
we
very
can't see
difficult.
Who's playing what?
You could in the performance.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, while you catch you want one of these? The air drums actually are a very interesting thing, because when I would move the air drum, it would trigger certain sequences. Sometimes video sequences and sometimes audio sequences. So some of the material was actually pre-recorded and then played back in time. So there were samples.
But they were being played, and so the keyboard, the mallet player can play very fast, So she was playing her part, but her beats were then turned into. It was always following her, so it was in tempo. Her beats were then turned into loops of beats. That would then, so she'd go, and so that beat would be controlling all sorts of things, including there were something, I think, close to 8 monitors across the stage, 2 gigantic screens, the size of what this one screen. We had 2 of those screens. One was the area where the dancer was, and the other was the area where the musicians were, and then. Some of those sequences, you'd see an image fly, actually through the monitors across the stage. It was remarkable. I mean, it was 3 years of very hard work and lots of rehearsals. We did 3 or 4 performances in Los Angeles, and I think 2 or 3 in Linz, and then did this production. There was no way to keep it going. It was just a huge amount of equipment.
What were the 6 people in the pit doing, or why were they not on stage?
Well, they weren't on the stage because what they were doing wasn't worth looking at. I mean, they were watching, and I mean, if something were to go wrong, when something went wrong, because things were always going wrong. We had duplicates of all. We had 2 computers, so one person's job was just to go between computers when one crashed. I mean, the technology was not up to the task at that point.
We were really pushing it.
Yeah.
When you think this was like from 84 through 87.
Yeah.
So it was really pushing the equipment further than it was originally designed to be able to do.
Well, we had some of the kids at CalArts had actually made some switchers and things like that. But at that point, it was a very early point. We had done one work before that, which Joan was in. We were already starting to work on Hungers when performed that. It was for the Olympics in Los Angeles. It was 1984, just before Jacob was born. And that work was gigantic also. And so when we got to this work, MIDI had actually not even, it was just starting when we did the other piece. So now we had MIDI, so I could take it to the next step. I'd already done a huge interactive thing there, so we just pushed it. And at that point, all the interactive art, there was none yet. I mean, all the interactive technology that followed, there just wasn't any yet. Very, very little. And so I had this whole sense that the future was this gigantic interactive thing. And actually, I don't think anyone had the energy I had. I don't have it anymore either. So I don't think there have been pieces with that much technology since. And well, it's a long story. We don't need to deal with that. But they were pretty. It was pretty intense. And musically, it was extremely difficult because the musicians had that's difficult music that they're playing, and it required very, very close attention because they couldn't see each other. So the three musicians on the stage could. I mean, the two on the stage, and then the cellist was sort of stuck in the center. And the dancer, when you see the hands on the screen, those are actually live too. She's got a camera on her forehead, and she's as she's moving, those are her hands that she's in a light. She comes across the stage, and you see this light and these hands lit up by the light on her forehead, and the big screen is showing, is being transformed as it goes, and all this had to be completely together in some kind of way. So, amazing performance.
I really want to ask you, Joan, about your wants. In the only text that we get is I want.
It's the only text in the whole piece.
I want to. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who are familiar with Joan's work, a lot of your work does not rely on text, and yet, just from all your different vocal iterations of saying "I want," we get a lot of different wants and desires are certainly rendered audible, even though we don't get a lot of text. So I was wondering if you could talk about, there's a lot of extended vocal techniques that you use at that section of the piece, like there's some vocal fry and ululation and probably some other techniques as well. So I was wondering if you could talk about, invoicing want with very little text, but kind of multiple vocalities.
Yeah, well, as I said before, that was filmed in layers. And I had in mind what I wanted, but never making it specific in words. And the vocalizations I felt were creating the kind of sonic layers of material that filled in the gaps or filled in the specifics or non-specifics. But also I was thinking about, as the filming was going on, I was thinking about the various wants. So it's it's layers of acting in a way, layers of acting and vocalizing, and as you say, a lot of the extended vocal techniques. Beyond vocal fry, there was also some multiphonic, which is actually sort of double stops for the voice. So there were various kinds of vocal layers that were superimposed.
Do you want to tell us about some of the motivations for those wants?
I'm sorry?
Were there any specific motivations for those sort of different manifestations of desire and want and need that you were going for?
Well, I think to actually get down to specifics, remove some of the mystery. and I actually like the mystery that's there. But I think you can. One of the interesting things about music is that as listeners, we each experience music differently. And we have our own images that are generated, we have our own ideas that are generated, and the musician making the sounds puts them out there. So what I was thinking about may not be as interesting as what somebody who's receiving it may be superimposing from their own life experience. I think that happens a lot with the voice. It's an instrument that is so incredibly fluid and malleable, and because we each have voices, we all relate to the human voice in a very personal way.
But let me add a little something. That the work, the whole evening is a series of movements or scenes. And this particular scene is the pivotal point. It collects the thing. So the general direction, there was not very much improvising in the whole piece. This piece was like a big cadenza for Joan, and the only words that you hear are those "I want" and "to be." I forgot that "to be."
I want to be were the only words.
Yeah, the only words. And so the only directions that we gave her, I don't think you did those live. Those were all coming from...
No, I did a lot of that just with Ed.
Pardon?
In the filming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was doing the ululating and all that live at the same time. But the only instructions were at that point was to encapsulate the whole idea of all the hungers we have as human beings.
all the human wants.
Yeah.
And
so
for
she
food,
did it
for
in
sex,
all the different
for
ways.
love. Yeah.
And so what was in her mind, nobody knows. But you get it. I mean, you really do get it. You don't know what each one, as she said, is. Everyone will get that differently. But the fact is, she's going through this whole thing, and the interesting thing to me, with Ed and I worked on this for, as part of the back story, is that you get the I in the mouth. So I want, and you get it even without the words, because the mouth is giving you I want, but the I and the mouth together are sort of metaphor for the words themselves.
Ed did a lot of work with eyes. I mean, you see the baby's eyes, really strong, and my eyes. And I also noticed in that particular segment, there's a long video imagery of another view of my face that reminds me very much of the Sunstone image. When I was looking at it, I had just looked through the catalog, and he filmed that very particularly, I think, to get that resonance of that Sunstone.
I was just picking up on something Maria was talking about, the kind of ambiguity of want. I also heard it a bit in the kind of timbres that were used in the music. Because it was FM synthesis, there's a lot of kind of clangy, bell-like, noisy, very sharp attacks, very kind of percussive. And in terms of like pitch, it was kind of hard to, let's see. In some of the more fast sections, it was kind of hard to pick out, distinctive melodic lines that repeated. I mean, I could pick them out after trying a bit, but it seemed like there maybe was some kind of ambiguity also, or maybe not ambiguity, but just like presenting a lot of things at once and not telling the listener or viewer what they should pick up on or what their ear should kind of track. It reminded me, there was an interview you did, Mort, where you said that your media poems, you want them to be everything all at once and not kind of one single thread. And I was wondering if, because I know this, I guess I'm wondering how this relates to your other work with multimedia, intermedia. and how you think about that kind of ambiguity of sound.
Yeah, it's not everything at once, but it's like there's no forefront and background, because, for instance, it's everywhere that way. But you don't get everything at once. But when whatever you're getting at any point, there's no one thing that's more important than another. Because everything is part of it. So the idea of the whole interactive part was that Joan was actually playing her own accompaniment, which was Joan. So you know, and I tried to use musically. I tried to use the palette, the electronic palette, which at that point that was the beginning of the Yamaha equipment. So it's far more pitch based than I had done before, so from that standpoint, you get, but I used those scales I made myself, and the FM I made myself. So those aren't anything that were on the Yamaha, but still it was that kind of a sound. And so, but what I've tried to do throughout is to take, like Joan was doing when she's saying, she's actually acting, as she said, she's being an actor in it with the I want to be. And she's singing against it, but the singing is expressing the same thing with a vocalizing. So, and with the music in general, what I've tried to do is to take music from the sense of noise or sound through the time, which is pulsing, to rhythms, to other kinds of things, all at the same time. At every given point, you have different aspects of it at the same time. So it's like, I don't know what it's like. I was trying to do something that's not like anything, so I can't tell you. But that was the sense of it. It's rich. It's always very rich, except for the opening, which is called Alone. And I think you do another version of it later. There was only one version here.
Only one in this video.
And the whole evening is like 70, 80 minutes long. So.
Well, one thing is that when you watch the video also flattens things, right? So the different layers and the chroma keying and stuff, it's hard to know what your eyes should want, I guess.
Yeah, you don't
it's the same problem when you see it live on stage. You have to make decisions about where you're going to look because there's so much going on.
And they last long enough for you to be able to scan. And then you get these bursts of things which interrupt. And I don't think I used spatial things in this one yet, but later I would use them so that you would have this thing happening and something would fly through the auditorium. I don't think we had it in here yet. But I've tried to have a name for this kind of thing. I don't like opera. I mean, I like opera, but I don't like opera for what this is. It's not opera. So I called it a media poem, and I was thinking of tone poems, but it's not a tone poem. It's a media poem because it's got everything in it. I think it's not a bad name. I don't think it means much to anyone, but it's not a bad name if you're going to do it.
I have a question, but it has nothing to do with hungers. It's just something that I was thinking about today, because if you have never, you should go to creatingmusic.com. I know that this is not your current project. I know you have like an iPad app about your sort of music pedagogy project, but I only recently discovered creatingmusic.com, which also has the most amazing cartoon version of you on the homepage, which is worth a visit on its own. And I know both of you in various interviews that I've read have sort of talked about wanting to prioritize not necessarily just music education, but the proliferation of like musical experience beyond an expert level. So I think I think it was you, Mort, at some point, some interview years ago, made an analogy about, even not having Olympic ability at certain sports, you still do it leisurely and all this kind of thing. So when you visit this creatingmusic.com, you can play these games where you, with blocks of color and triangles, and you can sort of make your own melodic phrase with some percussion added in, and then you are kind of tested on it. And if you correctly identify the phrase that you've created among a series of other phrases, Joan says you did it. And it's extremely satisfying to hear that. But what I'm getting off base about, but what I'm really interested in asking you about is about sort of like this question of music accessibility and kind of democratizing like music participation, like beyond just such like expert levels.
Yeah, if you go to creatingmusic.com, you're not going to see that right now because it's all sort of, there's very little left in it. I'm trying to get it put back together. The technology changed over the years, and I haven't had a chance to keep it, but there were CD-ROMs. You're thinking of the CD-ROMs without the games. And the idea was to give kids give tiny human beings, young, the experience of being creative with music, which you can't actually do. I mean, it's never happened before that you could make anything in the least bit sophisticated compared to what you can do with finger painting and blocks and things. I mean, the degree to which you could make. You could participate you could sing and you could dance but you couldn't compose. It really didn't exist until the technology. So that was the whole point of getting, being able to be creative musically. I don't call it making music. I do call it making music, but it's not music so much as musicality, creative musicality, and it now exists. On an online platform in Music First. It's as I just heard that a part of it, the part that you're talking about, where you actually draw and so forth, has now been bought, being put into private. Public schools, or not their public, but the young grade schools throughout China. It doesn't go in the United States. It hasn't gone in the United States. I mean, it's done well, but that's what they chose in China to do. So they're going to be doing it. So.
Well, you also created the iPhone app, Pitch Painter, which is a sort of cut-down version of it, so
actually
you can still draw on the phone.
I don't have my phone; it's not working. I mean, I turned it off. But there's an app. It's very expensive. I think it's $2.99. It's been going for a long. You know that one?
No, I haven't. I can't believe I missed this.
Yeah, it's up there. It's called Pitch Painter, and it's for the iPhone and iPad, and the kids can draw on it. And you could do it multiphonically. You can go up to 3 fingers at the same time and draw. But it also allows you to play it back, edit it, and you can move it through 4 different cultures that are different. It's the Euro-American has a clarinet, trumpet or something, I don't remember, and piano, and then you have a similar group for Africa. And then you have Middle East and you have Asian. And they're real scales, and you can just move it through. You can do it with a C major scale and then play it Africa, and it doesn't sound anything like that. It sounds the same thing you just did. And you can then, it has a little keyboard below, not a keyboard, but a bunch of little squares, and you can play it vertically. Because you've got it in this way, and it comes out as you did it. But you can also just let it sit there and it becomes an organ, and then you can play it. And you can save them and name them, and all for $2.99.
So I'm sure that this Hungers costs a lot more than $2.99.
Pardon?
Hungers cost a lot more than $2.99.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, just speaking of the kind of transience of technology, looking back on this piece, some 30 years on.
35 years.
35 years. What are your thoughts about, the technology you used, the kind of ideas you were expressing, the gestures you were making, and your work now? I mean, I guess one way to look at this, you can hear it and say, oh, it's very dated, the timbres and the MIDI and stuff. But there's also something very specific about the instruments you were using, and the voice, Joan, that you were using, that you still use, the human element, the creative influences. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about how you look back on this piece, later in life.
Well, I couldn't breathe through the whole thing because just remembering sitting there with the performances and rehearsals and, the amount of work that was involved in making it and the amount of work in performing it is so intense. I mean, you sort of get it, I guess, because I don't know what it feels like if you don't know what's going on. But in performances, rehearsals, I'm just holding my breath most of the time. And I started doing that here. I was afraid I was going to start coughing again. But it brought back, I think for both of us, lots and lots of memories. I think it's too much to try to talk about where that led. It did go. It went on to two more pieces, Jacob's Room, which was the big one. And then just to say this, that as we went through, I was going to add more words and more words. Until I wanted a piece that had ideas that were actually spoken and things. That became Jacob's Room, the opera. And we did get that far, and we had it very, very interactive. And then I realized that the words were so important because it was taken from a page from Virginia Woolf's Jacob's Room, which I took as Jacob in the room after coming back from the British Museum, thinking of the British Museum from Virginia Woolf's mind as the brain of human, the Western Europe, and he's sitting there in his room and he's reading Plato while it's raining outside that he doesn't recognize, and he doesn't recognize that he doesn't get that this woman is drunk coming home, knocking on the door, saying, let me in, and all these things. He's reading this about the perfect world. And then after the whole thing, he finishes reading, he comes to the window, and he sees clearly for the first time. That, believe it or not, sprang a Holocaust opera. And, so he was a survivor trying to hang on to the beauty of everything, and didn't want to remember, and finally is brought. So and once that started going, all the magic of technology began to disappear because you don't want to see, wow, look what's going on, or wow, the wonderful world of the Holocaust. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. So after all of that work for all those years, I got to Jacob's Room, and the technology essentially disappears, except at key moments, like when suddenly sounds fly through the grandfather comes down to condemn Jacob, and he comes and he's dead, so he's coming from the dead, and he stands there in the final production on a platform that's floating like an island in the air, and you see him at the edge, and he goes, oh, mercy, and the voice flies through the entire auditorium for the first time with these terrible sounds that come out of it. So it's very dramatic, but it's not magic anymore. It's not the magician. So it was funny after all I don't know if it's funny or not, but after all those years, I finally made it, and the technology disappeared. I mean, there was a lot of technology in it, but you don't witness anything like what you witness here.
Yeah, maybe we have time for one or two questions from the audience, if anyone. Yes.
So, either of you can chime in here. So, how difficult was it to cut the full theatrical presentation down to the TV version? And if you could have crammed in one more thing, what would it be?
I would have taken several things out. I think there was too much in it. It was too crowded.
Some of the segments went on. It seemed out of balance. Some segments went on too long. Some were not long enough. And I think in the limited time that we had in the studio, obviously decisions were made about what was going to go into this production.
Yeah, we carried I think it was a mistake. I think.
But at least we have a remnant of it.
Yeah.
But
I wish it had been. I mean, I didn't think that at the time. Neither did Ed. And I actually probably didn't even think about it until right now. But I think we would have been better off doing a documentation of it from, and talking about it, and not try to do the whole thing. But it was actually the Minnesota PBS. They wanted it, and the idea. I mean, I answered your question, I think.
Any other final thoughts? Going once? I guess you guys are eager to jump into our reception. So I want to thank our guests tonight. Thank you. This is a great conversation. And thank you, everyone.